Good afternoon. Um, it's a pleasure to be here. This is a favorite topic of everyone here on stage. We had a very animated discussion just before this panel started, and it's a big topic, and so we have a big panel here as well to tee up the discussion because energy storage, as many of you know, is a complex, multifaceted space. I thought I would set the stage a little bit by sharing a couple of things about energy storage. And these are some common thoughts that all of us here on stage had. But before I do that, just for disclosure and also by way of introduction, we are investors based in Silicon Valley. I grew up here in India, and then for the last 30 years, I've been in Silicon Valley. We invest in tech and clean tech, and this is part of our portfolio today. You'll notice a lot of the themes that are being covered here today and tomorrow are things that we like: electrification of transportation, electrification of pretty much everything, renewable generation, new building materials, lighting, batteries, power electronics, etc. And it's a very exciting space. There was a period of time when things were slowing down, but things have really picked up here, and we're having a lot of fun investing, including here in India, and including with partners like IFC. So batteries, the topic, or energy storage, the topic of today. I tend to think of batteries as a panacea. If you had to pick one thing that the world needs to do well here in the next few years, I think many of us would agree that it is batteries. And this is one chart by RMI that attempts to show that. There are many different versions of this, but really, truly, good energy storage can address things from transmission and distribution to backup to ancillary services to power firming and on and on and on. And this is just talking about the grid. This is not even talking about transportation. This is not even talking about everything else that we have gotten comfortable with in our lives from consumer electronics and others' point of view. And sure enough, a lot of work has been done on the value of energy storage and the value drivers. This is something that becomes important as the world starts to think about where to deploy energy storage and what to focus on. And the same discussion, I'm sure, is happening amongst many of you here in India as well. EPRI has done some great studies and put together reports on operational usage of storage, everything again from generation to transmission to distribution to end users. They've done storage benefit analysis down to what type of power is needed, what duration, etc. DOE has done a great handbook that summarizes what it takes for all the various applications, again from wholesale energy services to renewables integration to T&D support and on and on. So no shortage of studies and activities and things to look at. All some of the topics that we'll hopefully touch on today. Other labs like Sandia and again EPRI, more of the same. But what it all then comes down to, and I think what is on everybody's mind, is what kind of energy storage are we going to need? How much of it beyond the applications, and how do we scale? And if you think about, if you had to summarize it, really the business of energy storage, especially from a technology point of view, comes down to 5 main things that people strive for, and it's energy, power, lifetime, safety, and ultimately cost. And I know our panelists here will debate some of those topics today as well. there's a whole alphabet soup of chemistries that are out there today and evolving and changing. We were just discussing today even some of the pivoting that some of the large energy battery companies are doing around the world from one chemistry to another. But basically what you see on this graph is people attempting to solve for the two main drivers, which are power and energy, and adopting different chemistries to those axes. Obviously, the world has had a long history of energy storage without even thinking about it as energy storage. But something that is very popular here in India, hydropower, was almost the big first at-scale version of non-electrochemical storage. Since then, we have utilities going after pumped hydro, going after compressed air. Most of these are sort of in pilot scale. Some of the pumped hydro plants that we have in the United States and Europe are mainly where you have large nuclear power, where you have base load, where you have excess base load at night and are able to utilize it. People are now playing with regenerative air, thermoelectric. A fair amount of work has been done around thermoelectric. And then in the UK, for example, even liquid air, where even though it has a low round-trip efficiency, people are able to make it work because of the ability to use low-grade waste heat and also being able to integrate with thermal plants. A little bit of excitement a few years ago around CSP and thermal storage. We've seen some plants come up in Israel, and the Middle East has been harder to make work financially in most of the other markets. Cold storage, more as a distributed source and a high-value version of it, not something people normally think of as electrical storage, but since this is such a big consumer of electricity, people are going directly and looking at some direct distributed applications like cold storage. And then last but not least, an emerging space of vehicle to grid, where people are thinking about what will it take, once we have millions of electric cars roaming around on the streets, can they be used as a battery and energy source that interacts with the grid both ways? And a topic probably that will become of interest here in India as the adoption to electric vehicles starts. But all said and done, at the end of the day, I think the topic that's on everybody's mind when it comes to energy storage is batteries. And I go back to that chart. What is really important in batteries is people trying to work on energy, power, lifetime, safety, and ultimately cost. And there's a bunch of new battery technologies. We were talking earlier, India obviously has a very large installed base of lead-acid batteries. India already has a few million households that have behind-the-meter backup power in the form of household inverters, something that the rest of the world looks at and is as amazed at the amount that has been adopted. But we have several battery technologies that are now being worked on, everything from high-temperature sodium to advanced lead-acid, which we'll hear John talk about here a bit today, to nickel-iron, to aqueous chemistries, to alkaline chemistries, besides lithium-ion. And something that is now coming over the horizon are solid-state batteries. You'll start hearing more about those. And again, for full disclosure, we've invested in one of them and are quite excited about the potential of solid-state batteries, especially starting with the electric vehicle space. And why is all this exciting? Is because of this cost curve. You've all enjoyed and seen the explosion of solar that started with what happened in Germany and then spread through Europe and other parts of the world. But surprisingly, when you look at this chart, even though solar has had an amazing run of almost a 10x reduction in cost in the last 10 years, batteries have actually done even better. When we invested in Tesla about 12 years ago, lithium-ion batteries were generally being sold for around $1,000 to $1,200 a kilowatt hour. And Today, depending on who you talk to and what you look, they're roughly a tenth of that, around $125 to $150 a kilowatt hour. So even something like batteries, which was considered to be not something that you could get onto the Moore's Law curve, has taken that kind of a price performance improvement, and it's all very exciting for the business at hand. Electric vehicles are obviously a big driver of that, and you'll start seeing similar curves to what you've seen in solar when you look at adoption of that kind of energy storage and the increase in volumes of electric vehicles. And then finally, to use a Silicon Valley analogy, we see a lot of these technologies growing and adopting the famous S-curves, which represent how rapidly new technologies can take form, even though the first few years seem a bit slower. We've seen that again in lighting, we've seen that in solar. This is not just something that happens in consumer electronics, and we were taking a poll earlier, and the general consensus is that you will see this kind of an S-curve happen with energy storage as well. We are seeing the other version of that S-curve in the US and other markets, where just last year or the year before, even the energy storage market in the US surpassed the prior years by multiples, and by 2020, it is expected to have grown about 20 times just in the last 5 years. So that same hockey stick that we saw in solar expected to happen. So to help discuss these and some other topics, we have a great panel here today. We have John Wood, CEO of eColt Energy Storage Solutions, Anil Sardana, who is CEO and Managing Director of Tata Power, Sunil Jain, CEO and Executive Director of Hero Future Energies, Rahul Walawalkar, President and MD, Customized Energy Solutions India, and Dr. Chatterjee, Joint Chief of CERC. Welcome, and look forward to a good discussion here. I'll request each panelist to take a minute talking about his favorite aspect of energy storage and what they're passionate about and what they do, and then we'll get on to a discussion here. John.
Thank you very much. I guess you can hear clearly. My name is John Wood. I am the CEO of eColt. I'm an entrepreneur, and in my career I've launched a number of technologies globally that have been very successfully adopted to the benefit of their customers, the suppliers, and my investors. I've been in energy storage now for 10 years, so I joined the energy storage community about 10 years ago. It happened in an unusual way. I just completed my work in a particular area of security technology. The company had been purchased, and with my wife I went for a bicycle ride, a bit of a pilgrimage on something called the Camino de Santiago in Spain. On that bike ride, I ran into a wonderful man, Mr. Martin Green, and his wife Judy. And Martin was one of the pioneers of solar technology. And I said to Martin, "Mate, I'm looking for something that can make an impact. What should I get into?" And he said, "Energy storage." And so from that day, I was in the energy storage industry. I went back to Australia and I met some people from the CSIRO, which is a government research institution in Australia, and they introduced me to a wonderful technologist and a wonderful technology. The technologist was Dr. Lan Lam. The technology was called the Ultra Battery. And in my journey, I then assembled an awesome team that have worked with me to commercialize that and develop that technology around the world. We now have done significant projects in many places around the world. The technology is being promoted in Japan by Furukawa, in North America by East Penn Manufacturing, and here in India we have the great honor and pleasure to be working with Exide Industries, who will be manufacturing the technology in India. or who are manufacturing the technology and the batteries in India. It's been quite a journey. Along that journey, with my team and my partners, we have established major energy storage projects doing most anything that you can with a battery and a utility or in an off-grid context. We've worked on island projects where we have contributed ultra battery into island grids where there are a couple of thousand people on islands, and that island will run off wind and solar and battery. We've done remote telecom. We've done frequency regulation services on the PJM network, and one of the projects that we're doing at the moment that I think has substantial potential is a quite unique one. It's a very large, secure campus, and we're actually putting the best of everything together, putting together a project that will support the grid when the grid is operating, and then if the grid were to fail for any reason, actually islands the campus and allows it to run off its own resources, its own wind resources and solar resources and battery. I see that as a sustainable business model, and it's something I am very passionate about. I think that there should be no more reserve power batteries sitting idle on the planet. There are 100 gigawatts of reserve power batteries sitting around the planet today doing nothing, waiting for the grid to fail so they can sustain a data center or a telecommunication resource. I think they should all be unleashed and used to introduce more renewables onto the grid, but that's a whole topic of itself. As I said, in India, I'm in India because I think in India we can make a real impact. I feel blessed in India to be working with Mr. Chatterjee, the CEO of Exide Industries, who is a man of the utmost integrity and character, and also, I believe, a visionary leader. I think he's the sort of leader who can take a battery business and make it into an energy storage global business. I guess there's probably a few people in the room who are in the room because they feel they can make an impact on clean energy. Might do a quick show of hands, probably everyone. That certainly is why I'm in the room. If you want to do that, there is nothing that can quite do it like energy storage. If you get energy storage right, you can achieve sustainable energy, clean energy, energy security. In fact, what you're doing is you're taking away energy dependencies. So you can no longer make access to energy a political weapon. You're doing more than just cleaning up the planet. You're making the planet more democratic or more equal by achieving energy storage. That's why I'm so passionate about this industry and why I've committed to energy storage.
Thank you, John. Anil, 37 years in the power sector, I heard. You've probably forgotten more about this topic than most people know about this topic. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing at Tata Power and what you're passionate about energy storage.
Okay. So good afternoon and thank you, Dipender. So in the 37 history of working in power sector, the most important part is, and the most fascinating part is, it's been 21 years since we've been actually running the storage hydro. We built one of the finest pumped storage hydro in close to Mumbai, and it's been tremendously beneficial in terms of meeting all the peak demands. And as you know, Mumbai is one of the rarest cities which perhaps has not seen any outage in the last 50, 60 years, ever. Since we don't blink, naturally the storage is one of the key that always is there when it comes to peaking, when it comes to taking advantage during the off-peak times. Tata Power, for many of those who are not aware, is a 102 years old utility, one of the most reliable one in the country and perhaps the second largest to the state-owned enterprise. It's also one of the largest in renewable segment today in terms of how it's grown recently. I have a friend of mine who's going to be perhaps in the next panel. We acquired some of their assets, and by virtue of that, today are one of the largest renewable company. So in our portfolio, in India as also outside, it continues to emphasize on what's the latest, what's the technology. We are also proud promoter of reform process and distribution, where we made sure that the consumers in Delhi have seen the benefit of the losses being brought down from upwards of 50% down to something which is of global level today. And interestingly, we're putting much ahead of time a 10 megawatt storage plant right in the city of Delhi, which is being done as a proof of concept. I was mentioning to John that we will be very keen. We are already working with Exide and looking at ultra batteries to be one of the solutions that we want to experiment in other locations and other cities, just to make sure that we are ahead of curve in terms of learning, to make sure when the time comes right, when we have all reason to put storage as an integral part of the process for uninterrupted power to customer, or to make sure we have frequency regulation or chopping of peaks, we are there in time. Besides that, since we have a lot of interest in making sure that we cater to ultimate customer needs, we have more than 2.2 million customers. But more important is we're working on the storage secondary format, which is a concept which is very, very dear to utilities, as you know, worldwide. Today, batteries are being used in plenty. You saw it in the presentation that Dipender made in terms of how batteries are being used in electric vehicles. We are already experimenting with few of those batteries that we have got from Switzerland in terms of used battery after 3,000 cycles, as to how we can put that for secondary use. What does the economics mean? What's the performance? Can we get 500 cycles? Can we get 700 cycles further out of those batteries? So all in all, a company which actually works on technology. We have been pioneer in terms of getting the first time for almost every stuff that you talk about today in terms of technology in India, and we will continue to do it so. We're looking forward to working in this area in as much gusto as we did past in every other technology.
Excellent. Thank you. Sunil, I know you're approaching an important milestone next month. I read that in 5 years you're about to achieve 1 gigawatt of installed capacity. I'm assuming most of that is in solar and wind. Tell us a little bit about what you're excited about and what has you passionate about energy storage.
So, good afternoon, everybody. So, I'm a CEO and Executive Director with Hero Future Energies, which is a part of the Hero Group and part of the group which manufactures the largest motorcycles in the world. We produce 7 million motorcycles every year. So, this is an off-bid business for the group, which was in auto sector. Well, I've been very, very passionate about energy as such. I'm not differentiating energy in thermal or renewable and storage, because I believe energy can change millions and billions of lives, without which everything is dark. But having said that, you also realize that if you are so dependent on the conventional power, then you have a problem in hand, because in future that won't be so sustainable. So we embarked upon a journey where we thought renewable is the way forward. And I believe we have done fairly well in developing our own projects of over 1 gigawatt. And just to add that, probably by next month end, we'll be 1200 megawatts, which I think so is an important milestone in the journey what we had so far. As we move forward and we realize the vision of the Prime Minister is 175 gigawatt in a grid which would be around 400 gigawatts, I think so the important play happened was, what next? How will you manage the grid? How will you manage peak? What is going to happen as we move forward in our stride with renewable energy? And of course, storage was the only answer. I don't think so we have really too many answers as of today. So I believe whether storage, the storage has come of age, almost. It is because, if you recollect, 5 years back, people were very skeptical about solar. Look what it has done, disruptive. We are well below the thermal tariffs, at least in India. And even in the world, the recent Mexico bids have shown that tariffs are really low. So I think so solar is already there, and what it needs is a stable delivery power across 24 hours, and at least if not 24 hours, it can be a firm power whenever it delivers. And believe storage is the only answer for that. I'm a firm believer that storage is going exactly the same way, the way solar has gone, and you could have a price curve which is a reverse of a duck curve which we have. You will be having the pricing falling down faster than what we are anticipating. And if that happens, I don't know, my friend Anil is sitting here, at least in some places will we see a gridless world where you have a solar and a storage and large islands having only renewables with storage, no need for a grid. Well, as we move forward, I am quite passionate about storage and how technology will evolve and how we play with the technology.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So Rahul, you've seen a lot going on both in the US and markets abroad and in India. Maybe you can add a little bit to why some of these questions that are already percolating happen.
Sure. So thank you. I'm Rahul Walawalkar. I'm President and MD of Customized Energy Solutions India. CS is a global company headquartered in US. We manage more than 8 gigawatt of assets in Northern American market, and I lead our emerging technology practice globally. I got into energy storage more of an accident. On one fine day back in 2004, got a call from a friend in EPRI, Electric Power Research Institute, who contacted us saying that, oh, we are working with some interesting technologies and we are not sure with all these electricity markets and rules changing, how these technologies would fit into it. And you guys are a leader in electricity market. Can we do something together? And that's how we started on more as a one-off consulting project. That time actually I was working on my PhD also simultaneously at Carnegie Mellon University, planning to focus on demand response. And then somewhere this started and ended up actually writing some papers which got quite acknowledgement in the industry. And I still insisted to my advisor saying that I don't want to be known as a storage person. I want to actually focus on DR because I ended up publishing more on storage before I could finish my research on DR. So I spent 1 extra year on demand response. So he still keeps on reminding me that you never wanted to be a storage person. But now I'm very passionate about it. The two things I'm passionate about is energy management and storage. You can see that it's from my waistline that I don't just talk about it, yes, I implement in a practical life. But jokes apart, I'm very passionate because I have seen almost for 10 years before I moved back to India, for 10 years, how the energy storage technologies were evolving in US, the type of investments which are going in. And although we are still very much involved with energy storage deployment in the developed countries and we see a great fast growing market there, I was very convinced that actually in India, there is a better value proposition for demand response and energy storage technologies given the challenges on the grid. And that's where in 2010, I decided to move back to India. And right now, we have basically made a goal that we don't want India to remain just a large market for energy storage, which I think within next 12 to 18 months is going to happen. I think we have now reached a state where we no longer actually have to wait for policies. Again, policies can definitely help and accelerate, but just with the techno-commercially energy storage technologies are getting to a stage where India is becoming one of the largest market. But we want by 2022 India also to become a global hub for advanced energy storage, R&D and manufacturing. So that's what we are passionate about and trying to work on ground with number of companies, including Sunil's and John's, to try to implement that in India.
Great. So we'll come back to that. Dr. Chatterjee, a very common thread when we, no matter where you're in the world, when there's a new technology emerging, everybody says, if only the policies existed, the markets would take off, right? And sure enough, that is the biggest topic, or most common retort that I hear from energy storage developers. If only the policies existed. Can you tell us a little bit about what it would take, what kind of regulatory intervention to unleash storage markets in India?
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. The toughest job for a regulator, in fact, because you are under tremendous pressure of expectations from the stakeholders, and I am reminded of the kind of intervention that we did when solar PV, or for that matter solar technology, was in its nascent stage. In fact, we did not have any database, and stakeholders came and met us and said that you should come up with some magic number. No matter whether you have adequate database to come up with that magic number for a generic tariff for solar. Well, we were growing ourselves at that time. We did some maths and we did come up with a magic number of about 18 rupees per unit for solar. We got a lot of flags subsequently saying that here is a regulator who possibly does not understand economics at all. So we got flags from both sides. From the investors saying that 18 rupees is no tariff, you can't have solar with 18 rupees per unit. And we also got flag from the parliamentarians and the government, the other stakeholders, the distribution companies. What's it? I mean, who is going to buy at 18 rupees? So you are not at all aware of the realities, ground realities of the sector. But then there was one school of thought which believed that possibly that was the starting point that gave the drive, and the government of India came up with a policy of a reverse auction for solar. CRC's 18 rupees tariff was used as a benchmark tariff against which people were asked to quote discounts, and we are seeing where we are. In terms of the solar PV, it's gone suboptimal. So we are not sure as to whether we really contributed to this journey of solar prices coming down from 18 rupees to 2 rupees 50 or 60 paise. But then this is the kind of story that you have, and this is the kind of experience that you have as a regulator. So we are at this stage, we also are facing similar expectations, and people like Rahul, who have been engaging with us for quite some time, trying to impress upon the need for a regulatory intervention or a policy intervention which could give push to the emerging technologies like solar, like your battery storage, the electric vehicles. Despite all vices, CRC has been a thinking regulator and has at least been coming up with concept papers, discussion papers, trying to understand, because we feel that we need to learn together. I mean, it's an emerging technology. So we came up with a staff paper on storage. We also commissioned a study on electric vehicles, trying to understand first as to what the expectations are of the stakeholders from the regulator in terms of regulatory intervention for pushing these new and emerging technologies. And at the same time, what is it that we should do? And in that context, as I said, we are still learning. We still are trying to understand as to what is the right kind of regulatory intervention or a policy framework that you need. And in that context, some of the options have emerged, and we have not yet taken a call. But then one of the issues of intervention which has come is in terms of creating a market for ancillary services. Because see, I mean, in this entire continuum of power system operation, you start with inertia, then you have the primary control, then secondary control, then you have fast tertiary, slow tertiary, going on to the normal scheduling. So you have inertia and primary control, which in India we have said it's mandatory. All power plants who are capable of doing that, they'll have to provide it mandatorily. We have come up with a recent regulation. So now comes the secondary control, which is the AGC, and this fast tertiary. We are working on this segment, trying to understand as to whether we make any specific regulatory or policy provision for energy storage, or do we create an enabling market framework for this AGC and this fast tertiary where technologies like battery storage and others could fit in? Because you could be having demand response, you could be having pumped hydro. So as a regulator, or especially this is my personal view, that we have to be technology agnostic. Possibly the biggest contribution that a regulator could make is by creating appropriate market mechanism for all kinds of technologies to grow, and they should compete with each other, because at the end of the day, it is the consumer's interest which the regulator has to factor in. And given the socio-political and economic conditions of India, even as a central regulator or a regulator, if I come up with some magic numbers as we did for solar at that time, for battery storage, it will remain only on paper. Things have changed substantially since the time we came up with those magic numbers, and some projects possibly did come with very high tariffs. People have become very conscious of the tariffs or the prices that pay. You have market which is thriving now, the short-term market. So as a regulator, I believe this is one contribution which we could make, and we are seriously working on this segment. And just another, I mean, apart from these ancillary services, I mean, we are also trying to understand as to whether battery storage can provide the energy supply as well. And we were trying to understand, based on international experiences, as to whether the solar wind can combine with battery storage and give us firm power.
So taking that power, that point, maybe Anil, you've been doing this for a very long time, so I'll pose this question to you first, which is the overarching question around this that comes up over and over and over again, which is there's been a lot of talk about the potential of energy storage. It almost seems like the most obvious thing to do. In the recent history, from a storage point of view, we all heard the early skepticism there was, but we've really seen India move the needle on renewables and that deployment. What is it going to take to really get storage up and going, and why has it not happened yet? One of the things I heard throughout the day was lots of talk has happened over the last couple of years. Projects have gotten announced and then scrapped. So all said and done, when you step back, what is it that's holding that back, and why are we seeing this inertia?
Yeah, I mentioned, I mean, as a regulator, we see cost is the first and biggest deterrent. I mean, whenever you talk of a technology in India, people are wary of, I mean, since it's a new and unproven technology, people were
what do you think?
I mean, even
yeah, what do you think, Anil, from a provider of power today? Is it cost, or is it?
No, so if you're alluding to storage batteries, then naturally it is the cost. But the sense that I must bring to the gathering is the fact that storage, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, has been there for a long time. And I guess it's the tariff mechanism that's prevented the storage to really evolve. Indian regulators have never supported a concept of peak power versus conventional power. In fact, wherever even there are time of day metering or time of day tariffs, that's more sort of just to tick the box. It's really not incited the customer to shift the pattern of consumption.
That's an important point. So would you mind digging a bit deeper into that? Why has that concept not caught on here? Because yeah, so I'm assuming the reality still exists from a consumption and a curve.
In fact, if you look at the load factor of a typical metro, so look at city of Delhi, the difference between the peak power and the off-peak period is almost 50%. So if your peak is X, the off-peak is X by 2.
So you have a duck curve here too.
And there has been very little effort on part of the tariff mechanism to shift that peak to the off-peak period. And that's the reason why the storage hasn't really picked up, because there were, as you said, there were other formats of storage that should have actually been taken up by the developers. But nobody could justify a price because that peak remained peak for people to brave. In fact, today people buy conventional thermal power for the peak capacity, and they run it at 50% or even lower capacity, which is wasteful, because they will run at suboptimal level. The whole of the network is built based on the peak transformation capacity is built on peak power, and you use all of that suboptimally. This has been a point which has been taken home to the regulators, but you would see wherever the time of day, even if after a lot of pestering is done, it's hardly 15%, 20% lower, which doesn't really incite the customer to make effort to shift the pattern of consumption from peak period to off-peak period. If it's 50%, I can bet a lot of printing presses, a lot of washing machines will actually shift to off-peak period. And then you will find there'll also be encouragement because there'll be a good peak tariff for people to come with storage.
Anything holding that back, Dr. Chatterjee
Yeah,
or Rahul?
I'm not sure whether Mr. Anil is hinting at the TOD tariff for consumers, or is it the generation tariff that you're talking in terms of
There
peak?
is no
Yeah,
concept of
because
peak
see,
tariff.
I mean, we already have TOD tariff for consumers in several states. Of course, it might not be as steep. The difference between peak and off-peak might not be as steep as possibly one is expecting, but you already have that framework in the consumer tariff, especially for industrial and commercial consumers in several states. And our record shows about 18 to 20 states. So, if I mean, to what extent that is a roadblock, I don't know. One needs to really study, but I accept this fact, and in fact, that's something which is more in terms of a self-introspection for CERC, that you do need a separate peak and off-peak tariff for the generation. And this is where, you know, as a regulator, you try and engage with the existing players, and you have the existing generating stations who are themselves not very comfortable accepting this concept. And if you remember, Mr. Anil, we had commissioned a study. There was there's a report still available in the website of CERC where Rakesh Nath committee was there, where this was recommended for, but then all the existing thermal generating stations owners, including the generating stations owned by Tatas and others, were in fact opposed to this idea of peak and off-peak tariff, because there was a general feeling that, I mean, most of our plants are, you know, base load stations. So you cannot bring about this kind of a differentiation in that. This is something which is required, but just to add that, see, now going forward, you are going to have more and more of market. Now power exchanges are already operating, and you have peak and off-peak tariff for generation which is already getting reflected there. And we are expecting that going forward, as distribution companies start relating themselves to the power exchanges prices, slowly this trend of peak and off-peak tariff for generation will become a reality through the short-term market.
And I think this is, again, not a unique topic just to India, right? Because this tension between the incumbent install base and what their preferences are versus new policies that will encourage the kinds of things that you're talking about, right? I think that's going to become even more important if electric vehicles take on the roads in the numbers that we're talking about, because the last thing you want is that same duck curve for everybody to plug in, you know, millions of electric cars at the same time, because they have no incentive to do so otherwise. So I think this is something you're going to have to take head on. So Rahul, you've straddled two worlds.
Sure.
If you could wave a magic wand, what is the one ingredient that you would add to this to unlock this lockdown?
So particularly, I think, again, it is very frustrating to keep on hearing about the cost as the barrier, because right now in India, we already as a consumers are paying so many costs, where energy storage, even at the current price points, is a better and more cost-effective solution. It's, again, one of the challenges are on both sides. I would not blame only regulators. I think on the regulatory side, I think the biggest challenge is where you draw the boundary whenever you are doing policies, right? Because right now we have these two worlds where people who can afford are paying much more for a reliable power supply and power quality because they are as a typically commercial industrial customers paying much higher tariff. But then because of the unreliability of the grid, except for like certain cities which are managed by like Tata Power or other private companies, for most of the other places, they have diesel generators, they have UPS systems, they have other power harmonic system, other things. So they are paying lot more for getting a decent, reliable power, which if it is provided at a grade level through ancillary services, through other thing, would be at much, much cheaper level. And on the other hand side, we have consumers who cannot afford to pay that. They are basically subjected to like mandatory load demand reduction, or they are subjected to the huge voltage fluctuations because there is not enough attention paid for providing that power quality, and it is assumed that consumers are only willing to pay a very low price cost. So that's a challenge. On the private side, again, right now we think that we have reached now a price point where the private side deployment should happen into a very large extent, because particularly with solar plus storage now entering to a phase where diesel replacement is almost becoming a no-brainer. So any customer who has more than 500 or 1000 hours of diesel consumption should be switching that. The only thing which prevents the people doing that, investing in that, is optimism. That we are hearing so many things happening on the grid side, we have as a country become surplus. So if tomorrow my grid is going to be super reliable and I don't use my diesel generator, then I don't have a payback. So that's a dichotomy which we need to address.
Understand. So like I warned the audience, this is one of those very complicated topics. I had told Peter and Shalabh that we could use 4 hours for this topic, but since we didn't get that, I'll touch on a couple of more things that are important, overarching. So Sunil, as a corporation, you have succeeded in the past 20, 30, 40 years taking on some serious manufacturing and scaled in businesses that were not normally expected to succeed in a country like India. With that perspective, I'd like to ask you whether energy storage, which is clearly, from all the excitement and the talk, going to be a very big thing in India, whether energy storage goes the way of solar PV, which is manufactured elsewhere, most probably, most likely China or Malaysia or Thailand or your favorite outsourcing Asian destination, and then purchased and deployed here? Or do you think there is motivation and the stomach to do manufacturing of solar? And I'll add 2 caveats to it, or two subtleties to that. Can the Indian solar or storage industry avoid manufacturing and have a successful deployment and successful storage environment? And more, on top of that, can the Indian storage industry afford to do that?
Okay, I think so. If we talk of energy storage, let's put it into 2 compartments. One is EV and one is the energy storage for the grid and energy. Manufacturing should come to India. I have no doubts on my mind, but provided the electric vehicle picks up. Because that is going to be the key driver for the energy batteries. There is not much of a difference in manufacturing as far as storage is concerned, because it will be only the change of packs and a light battery management systems compared to a storage for grid versus storage for vehicle. I don't think so you can have millions of cars being manufactured every year or millions of vehicles manufactured every year and importing storage. That's not practical. All manufacturers of EV vehicles want their battery manufacturer to be next door as a component manufacturer. So logically it should come here. Energy storage per se, I believe for grid, it can be managed from outside. It can be. But the fact is, if you want manufacturing in India, I come back to the same thing, regulation and policy. Last 4 years, we have had roller coaster ride, here we are going back, and no policies has been announced. But there's so much of noise on storage and electric vehicles. Of late, of course, the government has got serious. But if you are serious on electric vehicles, you've got to be serious on the entire supply chain manufacturing. there are challenges why Indian promoters do not invest in manufacturing, because we have a very poor R&D base. And we are always afraid that a technology will overtake my existing manufacturing plant and I will be stranded with obsolete assets. So what we have to do is, there has to be a government mechanism which should be supportive of upgrading those technologies as and when they come. This is what I've seen in China. That is what they do. They support them in upgrading and moving forward. And I'm sure investments will come into that. I believe we should not follow the solar story. And today we are trying to push solar manufacturing in India through anti-dumping duty, which is ideally not the answer. We should not be following the same thing in storage after 5 years. We are already lagging behind, to be very honest. But still there is a lot of time. Manufacturing is the answer in India.
Do you see it happening?
So far, no, but I believe the big manufacturers are seriously having plans. They're looking at it, they're looking at the business models, and if the business model is making sense, I think so manufacturing will come. Although it's a large capex item, but still it will come.
So John, you are associated with Exide, which is essentially a household name in the country, clearly a big brand. From a volume point of view, we are talking now, storage growing orders of magnitude more. Just on lithium ion alone, the PC industry used to be the largest manufacturer and consumer of lithium ion, and when Tesla launched 10,000 cars, they were shipping more lithium ion cells than the entire PC industry combined, and that was 10,000 cars out of 17 million in the US. So we're talking 1,000-fold increase, 1,000,000-fold increase. From where you sit, what do you see happening from manufacturing capability in India?
Look, I think there's going to be lots of technologies out there. First thing, and I guess the rallying cry this morning was, what are you waiting for? So when I look at India and working in India and everything I'm doing around the world, India is kind of unique. You got 6 million home energy storage systems in India. We're thinking about getting 50 to 100,000 into Germany. It's just that the home energy systems in India are doing UPS, but there are 6 million in
Inverters.
Inverters.
6 million inverters connected to the grid today in home energy systems in India.
What the rest of the world likes to call behind the meter.
Behind the meter. We got 750,000 cell towers with batteries connected to diesel generators or solar in India. We've got e-rickshaws, and I don't know the number, but someone told me 1 million. But is that close to?
No, just started about.
No, but they're substantial.
E-rickshaws in India, and then I went to the market.
Only in Delhi.
I went to the market in Ahmedabad a couple of days ago, and everybody knew how to connect up their car battery to their inverter so they could run the lights and do everything at their stand. So India has already got it. India has already got energy storage. All of those batteries are being made in India. We want to do some new things with batteries. We want to make batteries work on the grid. We've got to do some advanced technology. And if you come see us on the Ultra Battery stand in the room, I'll spend sort of 10 minutes talking a bit about Ultra Battery and why that is a solution. I don't want to do that here because it's not appropriate. But I am a total optimist that actually India can take leadership in manufacture and energy storage solutions, and that indeed the solutions for the grid, to many ways, are more likely to come out of India than out of other markets, because of the needs here and the experience that's so distributed throughout the Indian economy.
So I think the important thing there is scale. From our experience as investors, when we talk to groups both here as well as abroad, the point that Sunil made comes up, which is this paranoia that I'm going to invest in a technology that is going to be obsolete by the time my plant goes up and running. So how do I do that? And then the second big thing is scale, which is, unless I have a gigafactory, am I going to be relevant? And so I think the thing that would be needed is to take the 9,000 employees that you have and multiply that to 1 million, and then it becomes relevant. And take the gigafactory that we've been talking about, and that Germany is talking about building 10 of, and China's talking now of building roughly 100 of, and see how many of those can be located here. So on that optimistic note, maybe I'll open up the floor for some questions. If we can have a mic up here on the left, this gentleman wins the first hand up award. I meant here on the left, but that's okay. Nobody listens to the moderator anyway. Yeah.
Hi. Hello, can you hear me? Yes. I am Weber from World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and I had one question. It's not. I mean, anyone can answer. For this electric mobility that we are, in India, everyone is, fascinated about. I was thinking that for the charging stations that will come up, and I don't see, many places where charging stations can come up. So, what are your views? I mean, there will be so many electric cars, but how are we going to deal with the charging stations?
Anybody want to
So,
handle that? I know there's a whole panel dedicated to it
let
tomorrow.
me respond because I think we are the ones who put charging stations. So, we put, so right now what you need to understand, there are only 1,500 electric vehicles sold in all of India, out of which 200 ply on a given day. So in a city, typically not more than 20 to 30 vehicles ply. So the number is so less that we have about a dozen stations in Delhi and close to about a dozen in Mumbai. And that's what caters to all the requirements, because most of the people today charge batteries at home. Gradually, as the volumes increase, the stations will come up at parking lots, office lots, maybe in residential colonies and different places. So it will give economy of scale, but I don't see happening before anything like 2022. That's our estimate.
I'll just add what Anil said. You see, the technology is changing quite fast. Your charging time, as it compresses, all your conventional fuel stations will ultimately have electric charging stations as we move forward, maybe 5 years, 7 years down the line, because that's the time when electric vehicles will really come in terms of volume. And charging times will reduce to 5 minutes, 7 minutes.
So I guess from a real estate point of view, the answer is you would swap out traditional petrol pumps or gasoline stations for that. And by the way, we are already seeing that. If any of you had a chance to visit California, where we have these corridors between San Francisco and LA where the superchargers are, a lot of the petrol pumps are now becoming charging stations as well. And one side of the pump is petrol, and the other side is electrical charging station. The gentleman in the orange side, yes.
Thanks for giving me a second chance.
Yeah.
So my name is Bhartendu. I represent a company called AutoGrid in energy analytics. And my question is about the adoption of the ability of utilities in India to adopt new technologies. And the question is directed, I would say, primarily to Mr. Sardana and Dr. Chatterjee. So there are some utilities in India like Tata Power, which have had decades of leadership in adopting new technologies. They've made the investments, they've seen the results. But when technologies come to India, and we often are faced with a situation where utilities either don't have the will or the funding or the autonomy to invest in new technologies, and unless they try half a dozen technologies with small pilots, they're not going to scale those up into large utility-wide deployments later. So the technology adoption, is not happening. And my question to Mr. Sardana is, in Tata Power has a system integration arm. So what do you see as the challenge when your system integration arm goes and tries to deploy the technologies that you've successfully deployed in Tata Power in the other utilities? And parallel question to Dr. Chatterjee is, what would it take to have the utilities have more autonomy in trying out small pilots to see what works, not make a large investment upfront, but to experiment with technology rather than come back and say, sorry, we don't have any discretionary budget to try these things?
I don't think so. You should generalize this question and make a sweeping point that the regulators don't support. I would say regulators in India are very supportive of new technology adoption for the simple reason that most of the technology end up being revenue neutral or tariff neutral. See, if you go to United States or developed economies and they want to make a shift in technology, I have worked in FERC, and the biggest issue that we used to have always the fact that this is going to be a rate case issue. So therefore, please delay it, procrastinate it, you don't need it. Whereas in India, they've been very supportive for the simple reason, everything that we have brought here, and we have brought in leaps and bounds, they found that to be so good for customer and so good from revenue neutral point of view that regulators are very supportive. In fact, if you today look at our distribution company in Delhi and Mumbai, we are much ahead, far ahead of most of the US distribution utilities for the simple reason that they are revenue neutral because the legacy systems were so poor that you can actually make sweeping changes. So regulators have been very, very supportive of new technology changes. I don't think so you should make that.
And,
in fact, it's the
Anil,
other way
you-
around. The utilities are not geared up, and therefore, since 89% of the distribution, for example, customer-facing issues, is
And,
owned by state-owned enterprises.
Anil, are you seeing that kind of excitement and willingness to adopt on the energy storage front as well? Because I know energy storage was the topic here.
So to us, they've been supportive. I talked about doing a POC of 10 megawatt. They've been completely supportive.
Yeah.
And I'm saying today, in fact, regulators themselves want to partake in technology evolution because they want to, as Dr. Chatterjee mentioned, they themselves want to learn. Yeah. So if someone is willing to do the proof of concept, they are very supportive.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Any other? One last question, all the way in the back,
somebody
and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, here.
Yeah, so I'm Abhinav. I represent an organization which is into lithium-ion battery recycling. I just wanted to point out, first of all, that when we are talking about batteries, we should also consider the fact that we are going to be having a lot of e-waste getting collected, and there should be a mechanism to recycle batteries. And it's important for a country like India especially, because if you are talking about battery manufacturing in this country, you don't have lithium or cobalt or the basic metals which go into manufacturing the battery. Recycling would be one mechanism by which at least you can have a significant part of whatever you have already sort of imported being redeployed. So would want to hear your comments
Sure.
on what's in store for
Absolutely. So John, I know you're passionate about recycling. You wanna touch on that, and then we can.
Exide, who I work with, one of the reasons we're working with Exide is that they have a full circle process. So they make the battery, they happen to be lead acid technology, but they make the battery, we deploy the battery, we recycle the battery, and we turn it into another new battery and put it back out. So sustainability is an essential part of whatever you're doing. So,
And you don't see any issue with lithium-ion or other technologies from a recyclability point of view?
people need to work solutions.
Okay.
I mean, the solution, it's
For-
good to hear that people are working in the area.
For what it's worth, as an investor, we have seen more battery recycling plays out of India attempting to scale abroad than the other way around. So it's clearly an area in which we see India having leadership, at least from an early thought point of view. So, okay, we are out of time, and again, I'd like to express my gratitude and thanks to an amazing panel. We could have spent hours discussing these topics. We barely scratched the surface, but with the time we had, I think they did a great job. Thank you very much.